Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. It is time for my Friday Reads video. This is my weekly video where I talk about the week in reading, any bookish things that happened during the week, maybe some things that I've been watching or other things that have been going on. This week was a little bit uneventful, which was a nice change of pace, especially after last week. Last week I talked about feeling really stressed out about everything going on. Work didn't really slow down. Life hasn't really slowed down. But feeling a lot better this week than I was last week, which is always a good thing. And I am still behind on responding to a lot of comments. I have read all of them, so I want to say thank you to everybody who left a nice comment, a supportive comment. It was really deeply appreciated. I don't want to overstate it. It was just a stressful week, that's all. But a lot of people said some really nice things, so thank you for that. If I haven't responded to you, I did see what you said, and it was very appreciated. There is not a whole lot that went on in the bookish world this week that's new to talk about, so I will talk about something I've been watching. It's the Great Chocolate Showdown on Hulu. That has been causing great joy in our household. Basically, we watched the first season in, I think, 2 or 3 days, and now we're trying to watch the second season a little more slowly because there won't be any more of it when that's done. But if you like baking shows, it's kind of a fun one to do. It's not great on the scale of, say, the Great British Bake Off, but it's fun and entertaining and everything you need in that department. I'm really excited because the Olympics are over, which means that Making It will be back also on Hulu this week, and I have been missing that show. Otherwise, I've just been plugging away at books and reading, so we can talk about those when we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. That's probably where we will spend most of our time in this week's video. I have a Gone with the Wind update. I finished one book. I'm almost done with a second one. Actually, I finished 2 books this week, I believe, and I'm almost done with a third. So we will talk about all of that in a moment. If you follow along, you know I have been burning through the last of my 3K Q&A questions that I did not get to in a video. So this week's question comes from Louise Williams. The question is not a book question, but what are the 3 paintings above your fireplace? I always see them at an angle and can never quite tell what they are. I will put a photo of them right here so you can see what they look like. Basically, it's just sort of graffiti art-esque New York City street scenes that kind of meld together. We actually used to have the order in which they were stacked differently, and you could do them diagonally, with the one in the middle going up, the one in the middle going down, however you want to do it. We bought them, I want to say 2012. We were engaged at that point, living in New York City, and my husband is really into graffiti art. He really enjoys that, so we saw these and just liked them, so we bought them, put them on the wall in the apartment, and then the next year we ended up getting married and moving to Montana. So now it's sort of like a nice reminder of where I'm from, because I'm not originally from New York City, but I'm from Long Island originally, so in the New York City area. So it is actually a nice thing to have on the mantle because it's art that we like, but it does have a personal connection to where I'm from, and that makes it a little bit poignant since, you know, we are in Montana right now, and it's a nice reminder of home. And I believe somebody else asked a question, I don't know if it'll be next week or the week after, about stained glass. So I will also be talking about the stained glass pieces that we have around the house. I've talked about some of them before, but odds are people probably missed them. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. Coming, I don't think it's next week's question. It'll probably be a couple of weeks down the road. And then the only other thing, I'm really particularly noticing it right now because I'm filming at a slightly different angle so I can sit in my work chair, but I'm really noticing I am running out of space in a lot of different areas. So you can see I've resorted to stacking books on top. So I think maybe this weekend or some coming weekend I need to go through and do an unhaul in my shelves and try to make a little bit more room. I have some candidates for an unhaul in my head. I'm also thinking about moving my Sue Grafton books and reorganizing that, but I don't really know what I would do with them if I took them out, because they take up a lot of real estate. You can see there's a pile of them here. I have one in front because it doesn't fit, and then they actually continue on to the next shelf. So what I'm thinking is taking this spot right here and putting them up there, and then reorganizing the top of my bookshelves a little bit, and then that way I still have my Sue Grafton books on hand, but they're not taking up a whole lot of real estate on my bookshelves, and I can maybe move things around and get a little bit more room. The problem is not this area, though. That's the real problem. I don't really need a whole lot of extra space in that area, so if I do take them out, I'm gonna have to do a lot of shifting to get to where I really need all of the extra space, especially in this area. And you can't see it, but I have another bookshelf over there, which is really cramped for space at this moment. And I have Kurt Vonnegut books lying flat on that shelf, similarly to this. So now I'm also wondering if I should find somewhere else to put those. I don't know. Lots of things that could go on with that. So I'm definitely reaching a critical juncture with my bookshelves. I need to make a lot of room, and because I have a lot of books that are waiting to get onto the actual shelves, not sure exactly how that's going to look. Any space that I make is going to be immediately taken up. I'm finding I don't actually mind this all that much. Yes, it does look cluttered and it's not great or ideal, but surprisingly, I don't mind it as much as I thought I would. I used to hate it a lot, and I think part of that is that I used to work at Borders, and at Borders you were not allowed to leave books like this, so it created a sense of urgency every time I see a book like this where I think, oh no, that needs to be on the shelf, and maybe I'm finally reaching a point where I can let that go. I think also I saw an Instagram tour of a independent bookstore this week, and they had some books stacked like that, and I thought, oh, that actually looks good. And I had already been doing that, but maybe it just clicked something in my head that made me think, oh, that's not the worst thing in the world if you have to arrange your books like that. You know, you're never going to have space for everything, so why not? But I'm curious, because I know bookshelf habits and organization is something that is very particular to each individual person. So is this something that bothers you as a viewer of these videos? Like, do you just want to put them on the shelf like I used to, or does it not bother you at all? Or did you not even notice it until I brought it up? Let me know. I'm just curious. Is this something that would be absolutely forbidden on your bookshelves? I might let it go for a little while longer and just see. But I do definitely need to make some room and pull out some books for an unhaul and see which ones will be taken by my local used bookstore. Let's get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. The two books that I finished are the ones that I talked about starting last week, and the first one I finished was Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. I really enjoyed the rest of this book. I mentioned the basic premise of this book in my Friday Reads last week, which is that Tita is forbidden to marry because she is the youngest daughter in her family, and her role in life is to take care of her mother until her mother dies. So she can't ever get married and have a family of her own. She falls in love with a guy named Pedro, and when the mother refuses Pedro multiple times to marry Tita, Pedro agrees to marry Tita's sister instead, reasoning that it's the only way he will be able to be close to Tita. Obviously, that doesn't go well. It is also a magical realist book. What I didn't mention was that Tita has an affinity for cooking and food because she is born on a table that was full of ingredients while they were cooking, and throughout the rest of her life, if she is feeling a strong emotion while she cooks, it ends up in the food, and the people who eat it will also end up feeling that emotion, which is a really interesting way of using magical realism. And it all ties back to the way this book is structured, like a cookbook, which is another really interesting thing. There are monthly installments. Time does not pass in a way that really makes sense given monthly installments, but that's, again, part of the magical realism of it. So chapter 1 is January Christmas rolls, which had me all excited because I love Christmas and I love rolls. But then you see the ingredients, which include 1 can of sardines, and all of a sudden I was not interested anymore. But then the chapter itself is the preparations for that item. You can see the opening sentence of the book is, preparation, take care to chop the onion fine. And then the story itself is woven into the directions for the book, which is a very interesting way of telling a story. And I really enjoyed this. This ticks 2 boxes for me in 2021. It is Women in Translation Month, and this is a book by a woman that has been translated into English. So that is done. And if I don't get any other translated work in August, I have at least participated with this book, and I'm glad about that. I also needed to read a Latinx author for my checklist for 2021, the reading challenge from Montana Book Company. So I managed to tick 2 boxes with 1 book. I'm really glad I finally got around to reading this book. It is something that I have been aware of for a very long time. I think I heard of the movie adaptation in the early 90s, and then when I started working at Borders in the early 2000s, I was always familiar with the book because it was assigned summer reading for a local high school in the area. So we always had copies. People were always coming in and getting it. And I always kind of thought about reading it, but never got around to it. And then I ended up with a copy last month because a used bookstore in Helena was doing a sale where you could get 3 hardcover books for $1. And I found this one as part of the sale. So here it is, and I'm really glad I finally got around to it. It is very smartly done, I think. Laura Esquivel is a great writer. She tells the story in a really interesting way. It's told against the backdrop of the Mexican Revolution. There are a lot of really interesting things going on in this book. Some of them are really subtle, which I appreciated. And I would definitely recommend this book if it's something that has been on your radar for a long time, like it was for me. And if magical realism is not for you, because I know there are a lot of people on BookTube here who are not into magical realism at all, and it's sort of a deal breaker. If that's how you feel, then skip this book completely, because there's a lot of magical realism. And if it's not your thing, you will not appreciate what is done in this book. I liked it. I don't know if it'll be in my top 15 favorite books of 2021, but it's probably in the 20 to 15 range, at least so far. So it's something I really enjoyed and could potentially be on my top 20 reads of 2021, but we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the year goes before we determine that. The next book that I finished this week was The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. This is something I also read for my reading challenge for the Montana Book Company because I needed to read a science or nature nonfiction book, and I reached out to someone who I would say is probably the queen of science and nature nonfiction, Doris from Aldi Books. She recommended a couple of books to me. All of them sounded fascinating, so I used the lazy man's approach to choose which one of them I was going to read. I looked to see which one was immediately available on audio, and this one was the winner. I chose it for that reason, but it really did stand out among the ones that she recommended to me, and I'm probably going to circle back to some of the ones that she recommended at some point because they all sounded fascinating. However, I just watched the movie My Octopus Teacher either early this year or at the end of last year. It's on Netflix. Really interesting movie. And I hadn't known a whole lot about octopuses before that movie, so now I was sort of primed to learn more. And this book is very much about a woman who is a journalist. She deals with animals a lot. She's written a lot of books about animals as well. She is working with an aquarium that it keeps octopuses. And she meets a lot of octopuses and talks about them and their lives and how they think. And it's all really interesting. And they all have such really big, outsized personalities. It is emotionally devastating when some of them die because of old age. They have very short lifespans. And that really just goes to show how much Cy Montgomery gets you into this book and the subject matter and into the topic of octopuses. So I'm really glad I was prompted to read a science or nature nonfiction because it's not something that's usually on my radar. I'm not usually looking for that type of book. And I really enjoyed this book a lot. I think this one will definitely be in my top 20 reads of the year when we get around to that time because I just really enjoyed it a lot. I feel like I learned a lot, and I know in the comments from my Friday Reads video last week there was a lot of really enthusiastic support for the book as well, so I know I'm not the only one and Doris is not the only one. And if you are interested in something that will just be a fascinating read or listen, I actually recommend the audiobook because Cy Montgomery reads it and she has this really palpable enthusiasm when she talks about the octopuses that she meets. And even at 1 or 2 points, it almost sounds like she's getting choked up. And it's hard not to get a little bit swept up in her voice as she tells the story of her life with these octopuses and the people who care for them. However, we were in a bookstore over the weekend and we managed to find a copy of The Soul of an Octopus. My husband Joel actually read this book as well. And we were looking at the copy of the book and it has really great pictures inside and there is actually a flip book in the corner of the book. So I'm going to use a paperback as a demonstration. So if you flip the pages in the lower corner, there is like a flip book of an octopus moving around, which is pretty cool. So You have to decide which copy would be right for you based on that. I'm really happy I listened to the audio, but part of me wants a copy of the physical book now because it's really beautifully put together. So let's get to books that are still works in progress. I have 2 of them that I'm still working my way through. One of them is the one I just held up. If you follow along, you're probably not surprised. I'm still working on Gone with the Wind. So I did make an effort to get back to this book this week after I finished Like Water for Chocolate. Like Water for Chocolate was a break from this for me because I kind of needed that distance. Now, since I picked it up, I really didn't get very far. I am currently on page 445. So that's like 40 pages beyond where I was at this time last week. So I need to make a decision about what I'm going to do with this. A lot of people have commented to say, well, you're clearly not enjoying this book. Why don't you just DNF it? And I feel like because it's part of the Pulitzer Prize project, I owe it to the book to make an effort to finish, and because I'm trying to interrogate whether or not there is racism in this book. Spoiler alert, there is so much racism in this book. And I get what a lot of people, by the way, this is a tangent, I get what a lot of people are saying. People talk about how they read this book when they were young and they didn't notice anything really bad. There is a lot of overt racism in this book. There are passages in here that just slap you in the face with it. But I do understand that for a long time, white people in this country were afforded a bit of a distance from that, like a sense of remove from any kind of responsibility for or association with racism. So I get what people are saying when they talk about how they read this book a long time ago and didn't notice anything. You didn't have to think about it. So I understand why people were either able to dismiss the racism that they saw in this book, and I understand why people didn't notice it, even though, as I said, there are passages in this book that just really slap you in the face with it. However, I do think we're at a point in society now where we should be able to acknowledge that there is a lot of racism in this book. And if we refuse to grapple with that, then we are part of the problem. We're continuing that environment where this book became such a runaway bestseller and cultural phenomenon, and nothing is ever going to change. So we need to be able to look back at this book. Now, I'm not trying to say you can't like Gone with the Wind. By all means, like it. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't read this. If you're interested, read it. But you have to grapple with the uncomfortable side of this book as well. And if you can't, there's a problem. So here's what I'm thinking. This weekend, right now, we don't really have any plans. I might try to go through my bookshelves and pick some things for an unhaul, but we don't really have plans. So I might try to do some speed reading through sections of this book and see where that gets me. Because of the movie, I am also familiar with where the story goes from here. I know what happens. I know where it ends. And I don't think the book is going to deviate very far from that, or I don't think the movie deviated very far from the book, because so far it really hasn't, other than the fact that Scarlett has a kid. So the movie sends that little detail out. And even in the book, it's easy to forget that she has a kid because she's just doesn't care about him. And the book is very plain about that. She didn't want to be a mother. She doesn't like the fact that she has a kid. So she just forgets about him as much as possible. So that's really the big difference between the book and the movie so far. So I think I'm going to try to speed read my way through large chunks of this book and see where that gets me. If I finish, great. And then on Monday, I'm starting a different physical book because it's a buddy read and because I think at this point I've proven I need another break. So even if I continue with it beyond this weekend, I am going to need that break. So we'll see what happens with it. And then if I finish or I get to a point where I feel like I can be done with this, I'll get ready to do my Pulitzer Prize deep dive on this massive book. By the way, I had a conversation with Brian from Bookish about Absalom and the racism that William Faulkner had and that you might find in that book compared to what I'm finding in Gone with the Wind. It was a really interesting conversation, and I haven't mentioned it in a Friday Reads video. I think it will come up a lot in the Pulitzer Prize deep dive when I get around to that, so we'll see when that happens. So this is the all-important weekend for Gone with the Wind. I think if I speed read my way through parts of this book and don't feel like continuing, I'm just going to stop. If I don't get very far and I think, I think it's worth continuing, I'm going to drag this out. And then maybe it'll take a really long time for me to finish it, but that'll be fine. So I have one other thing that I'm working on, and it's an audiobook. It's The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop by Fannie Flagg. This is something that I heard about last year when it was released, and I was immediately intrigued because it is a sort of sequel to Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I really love that book. And I love the movie as well. There is a huge difference in the ending between the movie and the book, and I don't want to spoil it right now. I love both of them. That's the point. That's the takeaway here. But I also struggled with myself because I kept thinking about, does Fried Green Tomatoes need a sequel? I don't know. And then somebody commented somewhere toward the end of last year to say that they had read The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop and recommended it to me, and that kind of got me interested. And eventually I put myself on the waiting list for the audio. When I got on that waiting list, I didn't realize Fannie Flagg reads the audio herself. I have been in love with Fannie Flagg since I saw reruns of The Match Game in the early 2000s, and she is just a treasure. And what's funny as well is that I had seen the movie when it was released on VHS, somewhere in the early 90s. And then I became a fan of The Match Game in the early 2000s when I started seeing reruns of it on TV. And I didn't realize that she was the author of the book until I had been watching Match Game for about 2 years. So when I found out, my appreciation of her just went up all the more. It just skyrocketed. And one of the things I really like about Fried Green Tomatoes is that it feels like sitting down with a great old friend who's a great storyteller and just listening to them talk for a while. And that is the same feeling you get from listening to The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop. She has a really great voice for reading her own work, and it really emphasizes that feeling that you're sitting down with an old friend and catching up. This book has kind of stolen my heart and my attention. I've torn through it pretty quickly. I am, I think, 60% of the way through, and I've only been reading it for a little more than 24 hours at this point, and I can't wait to finish. It deepens the story from Fried Green Tomatoes, but it also takes some different turns and directions. The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop is Bud Threadgood. If you are familiar with Fried Green Tomatoes, he is the son of Ruth, who lost his arm in a train accident. And in this book, you kind of speed through his life in the first section to the point where he is an older man himself. He has a daughter who is named Ruth after his mother. And it's a little bit about their relationship, but other characters from Fried Green Tomatoes pop up throughout the book. The weekly newsletter that was written by Dot Weems comes up throughout the story. Evelyn Couch pops up. And it really does feel like a reunion with people that you knew in the past and loved. And it adds an element of generational storytelling that I really deeply appreciate. And one of the things I really love about Fried Green Tomatoes is that it talks about the passage of time in a really deep and profound way while being an intensely readable and likable book. So if you're familiar with Fried Green Tomatoes, you know that Bud Threadgood's father was this no-good guy. He was abusive to his wife, and over the course of the book, he disappears. And no spoilers for Fried Green Tomatoes, but his disappearance is a big part of the plot of that book and the movie as well. But within Fried Green Tomatoes and the universe that you find in that book, and again in the movie, the characters that are important and central to the story all know what happens. When you get to the Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop, Bud does not know. And that puts a really interesting wrinkle on the story because you have the people in the previous book who were very aware of what happened and why it happened and how it went down, and even going forward they always know. And now you have the perspective of somebody who does not know what went on and doesn't necessarily understand what went on or why his father was not part of his life. And that's a really interesting wrinkle to the story. And then his relationship with his daughter and with Whistle Stop, which does not exist anymore at this point in time. It almost has shades of The Trip to Bountiful, if you're familiar with that story. It's just a really beautiful way of extending the Fried Green Tomatoes universe, if you will, and I'm really enjoying it. A lot depends on how things go in the last part of the book, but this could easily end up on my favorite reads of 2021 as well. I don't think it's going to replace anything in the top 5, maybe not even the top 10, but I'm really wildly enjoying this right now, and I can't wait to finish it. And I'll talk more about it next week because I will finish this book really quickly. If not today, then tomorrow, because I'm just going through it that quickly, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about it. It just feels nice to be excited about a book because Lord knows I have needed that feeling lately. Haven't been getting it here. Now, let's finish with something that's coming up. I mentioned that I have a buddy read starting on Monday with Britta Bowler. That is going to be Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. I am really excited about this. I'm kind of all over the map with Louise Erdrich's books. I have read and absolutely loved The Plague of Doves. I thought The Roundhouse was fine. I did not like La Rose, and I thought Night Watchman was just fine. So kind of up and down and all over the place. This is one of her earliest books, and I am really looking forward to it because it is one of her major books. A lot of people reference this book when they talk about Louise Erdrich as a writer, and I haven't read it yet. I have a signed copy of it because I purchased this at her bookstore in Minneapolis. If you are unfamiliar, she owns a bookstore called Birch Bark Books, and if you are in the Minneapolis area, I recommend checking it out. It's an adorable little store. They have obviously a lot of copies of her books, and they are signed, so that's a nice little excuse to go. And if you are a fan of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, when I was in Minneapolis, I did a Mary Tyler Moore tour. All of the landmarks that they use as exteriors, at least in the first few seasons, are right in the same area. The exterior of the building for the TV station, all of the locations that are on the street when she's walking, they are all within 2 or 3 blocks from each other, right outside the exterior they used for the office building. So when they filmed the opening credits, the iconic opening credits of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, it was all done within 3 blocks. And then the house that they use as an exterior is like not even 5 minutes away. And the lake that she walks around is a block away from the house. So I went to all of those places, and then when I was done, I went to Birch Bark because it's right there. So you don't have to be like me and do the Mary Tyler Moore tour aspect of the Minneapolis trip. But if you're watching this, I'm assuming you're a book person, so you could at least do this. I recommend that. And if you want to do the Mary Tyler Moore tour, think of me while you do it, because I did it. It's my mecca. Anyway, I'm really excited to start this on Monday. We are going to be doing, I think, 3 chapters a week, if I remember correctly. So that will leave a little bit of room to struggle with Gone with the Wind if I want to, or explore with some other things as well, and not put a whole lot of pressure on it. But I'm really excited to do another buddy read with Britta, and I'm really excited to be getting into this one as well. So that's my Friday reads, and that's what's been going on in my bookish world this week. I would love to hear what you've been loving, what you've been hating, what you've been reading, if you've been struggling with what you're reading. What do you think about stacking books on your bookshelves? Let me know about that in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the comments, even though, like I said, I have been terrible at keeping up with them lately. I do read them all, so thank you for them if you leave them, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.